guys, this week's topic is India's empires. We will be looking at chapter 13 in your textbook. So if you would like to get some more details on anything that I talk about in this presentation, that's where you want to look. You'll also get information through your assignment this week. So here is an overview of the two empires that you're going to look at. We're going to study the Maurya Empire and then the Gupta Empire. So up until this time, India was a bunch of kingdoms covering the land, really. It was a bunch of independently ruled places. That's going to change under the leadership of a man named Chandragupta Maurya. Chandragupta Maurya united India's kingdoms into one empire. He created a bureaucracy, which was a system of departments and agencies that carry out the work of government. You already looked at that idea this year when we studied ancient Egypt. It's the same government system that the pharaohs used. He also took his very large empire and divided it into smaller parts called provinces. You can see a map of his empire on page 414. He hired officials who assessed taxes and imposed laws within these provinces, basically ruling for him. And then he also taxed citizens heavily to raise an army of 630,000 men and 9,000 elephants. His tax system required tax workers to collect 25% of crops raised by farmers, and then they also collected a sales tax on different goods. Now, yes, he used some of the money responsibly, but on the other hand, Chandragupta was also the type of ruler that used that money to support his lavish lifestyle. All right, when we talk about how he was as a ruler, we want to look at a person called Kautilya. So Kautilya was one of his advisors. Kautilya also wrote a book called the Arthashastra, and Chandragupta really followed the advice of Kautilya when it came to leadership. So in this book, it called for a leader really to do anything necessary to keep power. Kautilya really did not believe that people could be trusted. He urged leaders to inflict severe punishments for all kinds of crimes. At the same time, Kautilya also said that kings should protect their subjects and they should look out for the people's welfare. But when it comes to how that was done, keeping power was the number one thing that rulers had to kind of rely on. They had to keep their power, no matter what. So how did Chandragupta do that? He had secret police. These police would report any kind of dissent, any kind of hint of rebellion going on. They definitely kept an eye on crime. He had a network of spies. He had servants who tasted his food for poison. He slept in a different bed every night. He had women who were warriors protect his palace. They were specially trained. Really, every day was about him kind of just keeping track of knowing as much as possible about what was going on in his empire. He did not trust anybody. So when we look at Chandragupta, interestingly, when we look at what happened to him, as he got older, he actually became more religious, and he became a follower of a type of a branch of Buddhism called Jainism. And in this system of religion, they aim for enlightenment, much like Buddhists. They kind of look within for answers and use meditation, just like we were looking at. They also have some things in common with Hindus. But when Chandragupta turned to this religion, he realized that it kind of conflicted with his way of ruling. So he gave up his power and he actually went into a monastery full time, and he passed down power to his son. His son was named Bindusara. If you look at page 416 in your book, Bindusara really doesn't do very much for like what we're studying. I mean, he expanded India, the empire a little bit, but really the leader that we want to spend the most time talking about here is somebody named Ashoka. So Ashoka was one of Bindusara's sons, and we're just going to talk about some of his accomplishments here. So here we go. Ashoka was Chandragupta's grandson. He acquired some more territory. In order to do that, he fought a very bloody, long war, and eventually Ashoka was really touched by this. He was able to defeat this area called Kalinga, but after seeing so many people killed and so many people suffering, he decided that this new kind of reality and understanding of life was not how he wanted to go forward. He did not want to cause any more suffering than he'd already done. So he turned to Buddhism. And from there, his empire really changed. So he controlled this very large empire, but he decided to do it peacefully. And he did that through Buddhism. All right, so when we talk about Ashoka and Buddhism, he really took into considerations the teachings of Buddha with peace, and he installed these huge stone pillars and inscribed his policies. And here in the slide, you can see a picture of one of the pillars. It's also in your book on page 417. These new policies were called edicts. Basically, Ashoka wanted to make sure that his subjects were all treated humanely and fairly. He encouraged religious toleration. So even though he was Buddhist, he accepted that not everyone would agree with him, and he was okay with that. Some accomplishments: he had an extensive road system built, and he also constructed hospitals. So this kind of goes back to reflecting his Buddhist beliefs in taking care of all living things. Some other things: he encouraged a vegetarian lifestyle. He limited Hindu animal sacrifices, sent missionaries to China and Sri Lanka. He paved the way for Buddhism to Asia. And then when we look at when he died, really his empire crumbled because he did not have a plan for who would take over. So as a result of that, parts of the empire lost support here, and after 136 years, the Maurya Empire came to an end. So that's going to lead us to the Gupta Empire. So, and there's a typo on there. I'm sorry. It should say Gupta next to the map there. I will fix that. All right. So when we talk about the Gupta Empire, we're going to transition over to chapter 13, section 2 here. This empire was established by Chandragupta I, not the same as Chandragupta Maurya that we looked at earlier. When we talk about which empire was bigger, it was the Mauryan. The Guptas never conquered the Indus Valley or the Deccan Plateau. But this time period, what we're looking at now, the Gupta Empire, is what we would call India's Golden Age. All right, so again, no relation to Chandragupta that we looked at earlier. But Chandragupta I organized a strong central government, ensured peace and prosperity. He left power in the hands of individual leaders and city government officials. When we look at religion, so Ashoka really changed the Mauryan Empire to Buddhism. Under the Gupta Empire, they practiced Hinduism. People in the Gupta Empire had more freedom and less taxes than in the Maurya Empire. Something important is that they wrote down their laws, which we've talked about before being important, so that everybody is aware of what they're supposed to do. I started off by saying this was India's golden age. There were many important achievements that happened under the Gupta Empire, and that's really, I think, the more interesting part of this. And if you look at pages 422 to 425, you can see a whole bunch of pictures and graphic organizers that summarize those achievements. All right, so let's look at some of those. So we've got some stuff in astronomy, math, and medicine. So if we look at in your book in astronomy, under the Guptas, they actually identified 7 planets. They were able to calculate the diameter of the Earth. They knew that the Earth was round. They even developed an early theory of gravity. When we look at math, you can thank the Guptas for the Arabic numeral system. If you take a look at page 424, you can see a chart that explains how that works. They combined a decimal system with a numeral for 0, which makes things like multiplication and division much easier. With medicine, they had quite a few things with medicine. They used different herbs. They also developed a system of medicine called Ayurveda, and they came up with a bunch of different treatments for different diseases. They also explained how to treat medical problems like broken bones. They had calendar systems. They had a 7-day week, which was divided into hours for the days. They did surgery, and they created modern numbers, which I just mentioned. It is also said that they found an early way to vaccinate people or inoculate people against different diseases. And there's some evidence that they may have created an early vaccine for something that was like smallpox. So if you are bored and want to find out something really interesting, do a little research on that. I think you will find it fascinating. Okay, trade. So here, this map is going to show you some trade routes. You can see all the red lines there are some trade routes throughout Asia. And you can see some of the trade goods that were exchanged along this. And we're actually going to talk a lot more about trade when we get into our next unit on China. But I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a picture here, a visual. You can see the Gupta Empire there is in orange. So you can see the area that they covered. And then you can use the map key there to identify some trade goods like cloth, some grains, timber, and so on. So you can use your map key to identify some of those. All right, so what happened to them? Really kind of like the same thing that we've been looking at with almost every empire that we study. There were a series of civil wars, weak rulers, and then invaders that come in to undermine their stability and kind of take over. And then India went back into being the many independent kingdoms. And then really there was no empire seen in India for nearly 1,000 years. So that is the end of the Guptas. So for us, the main thing though, again, if you take a look at page 425, it really outlines their achievements for you in a nice chart. And that's really what we want to remember for us. So this week, you're going to read a little bit more about the Maurya and Gupta empires. You have a reading assignment that you need to go through and answer the questions to. Please make sure that you use the reading passages for the answers and that you are not going on Google, typing in the question, and then copying what you see there. I will not accept that work. Okay, so all week, if you have questions, you can email me. Otherwise, I will see you Friday at 9 o'clock for our live session. Have a great week.